Welcome to the Deep Dive. We love to dig into fascinating topics, and today we're going way back in time to ancient Babylon.
Wow, ancient Babylon.
Yeah, we're going to unlock some financial wisdom from this classic book, The Richest Man in Babylon. It's like we're time traveling back to learn directly from the wealthiest citizens of that era.
That's a really cool concept. I love that.
And to guide us through these ancient secrets, we'll be using, of course, the book itself, but also some expert analyses and modern interpretations, to see how these ancient principles hold up today.
Well, and what's really fascinating about this book is that even though it's set in ancient Babylon, so much of what it teaches is still relevant. Surprisingly relevant even today.
Yeah, that's what makes it so interesting. So tell me a little bit about this book for someone who might not be familiar with it.
Sure. So The Richest Man in Babylon is structured as a series of parables.
Okay, so kind of like Aesop's fables.
Exactly, like Aesop's fables. But instead of teaching moral lessons, these parables focus on how to build wealth and achieve financial success.
Okay, so we're starting in bustling Babylon, a city famous for its wealth and wisdom. What's the big takeaway from this book? Is there some secret formula for riches hidden within these pages?
Well, not exactly a secret formula, but the core message is that wealth is achievable for anyone. Through disciplined habits and simple principles, it's not about magic or luck.
Okay, no magic, just good old-fashioned hard work and discipline. I like that.
Exactly. It's about consistent action.
Consistent action, I can get behind that. Now, one of the first principles that really grabbed my attention when I was reading this book is the idea of pay yourself first, saving 10% of your income before anything else. Honestly, saving consistently has always been a bit of a struggle for me. This idea of paying myself first is really intriguing, but is 10% really a magic number? Or could someone start smaller, say 5%, if that's all they can manage at the moment?
It's more of a guideline than a rigid rule. The key here is to prioritize your financial well-being and to start forming that habit of setting aside money for yourself.
Makes sense. So even if you start small, the important thing is to just get started and build that habit.
Exactly. And even if you start with 5%, you're still establishing that crucial habit of saving. And as the book says, and I love this quote, a part of all you earn is yours to keep.
A part of all you earn is yours to keep. Powerful stuff.
Right. And to make it even easier, think about setting up an automatic transfer to a savings account on payday. It's like a modern twist on this ancient wisdom.
Automation is a game changer when it comes to building good habits.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're paying ourselves first. We're automating our savings. But saving is only one piece of the puzzle, right?
Right.
The book also talks about living below your means, which, let's face it, feels especially relevant today. With all the pressure to spend and keep up with the Joneses.
Oh, absolutely. And the Babylonians, they understood that true wealth doesn't come from having a lot of stuff. It comes from controlling your money, not letting your money control you.
Okay, so be in control of your finances, master of your domain.
Exactly. And one of the most memorable lines from the book really drives this point home. It says, "Control thy expenditures and thy purse will be fat."
Control thy expenditures and thy purse will be fat. Okay, I love that. It's so simple, but so true. So how can our listener put this principle into practice? How can they start living below their means without feeling like they're depriving themselves?
Yeah.
Any practical tips?
Well, I think budgeting is key here.
Okay, budgeting.
Yeah. Start by just tracking your spending for a month or two,
Yeah.
so you can actually see where your money's going. You might be surprised what you discover.
Oh, I bet. I think a lot of people would be surprised.
Right. And once you have a clear picture of your spending, then you can start identifying areas where you might be able to cut back without sacrificing the things that truly matter to you. It's all about recognizing those needs versus wants. And there are so many tools available today that can help with this,
Right.
Like, for example, you could try using a budgeting app. There are tons of them out there, and many of them connect directly to your bank accounts. Yeah. So they automatically categorize your expenses for you, which can make it so much easier to see where you might be able to make adjustments.
So you're not manually entering every single purchase. It's all done automatically.
Exactly. Technology can really make budgeting so much simpler these days.
Okay, so we're saving diligently. We're being mindful of our spending. We're using technology to our advantage. What's the next Babylonian wealth-building move? What do we do with all that hard-earned money we're saving?
Well, now it's time to put that money to work. It's time to invest wisely.
Invest wisely. That's where things get really interesting. But investing can seem intimidating to a lot of people. What would you say to someone who's new to investing?
I understand that. It can definitely seem daunting. But the core concept is actually pretty simple. You're aiming for long-term growth. So,
Yeah.
for example, think about the Babylonians.
Okay, back to Babylon.
Right. They would invest in things like land and trade. Those were their wealth-building vehicles. And those were things that, produced income and had inherent value.
Right, tangible assets.
Exactly. Now, in today's world, a modern equivalent of those types of investments could be something like index funds.
Index funds.
Yeah, index funds. They allow you to invest in a diversified basket of stocks. So you're essentially owning a piece of the entire market.
So instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, you're spreading your investment across a wide range of companies.
Exactly. And it's a relatively low-risk way to participate in overall market growth, It's kind of like pooling your resources with others to buy a share in multiple businesses.
I like that. It's like a team effort for building wealth. Now, the Babylonians were also big on protecting your wealth, right?
Oh, yes. They understood that safeguarding what you've earned is just as important as making money in the first place.
Right. It's not just about making money. It's about keeping it, too.
Exactly. So the book emphasizes avoiding risky ventures. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Diversification is key.
Diversification. Wise advice, even for a Babylonian camel trader.
Exactly. And of course, don't hesitate to consult trusted financial professionals for guidance tailored to your situation.
Okay, so we've got our Babylonian money-making machine humming along. We're saving, we're budgeting, we're investing wisely, we're diversifying. What's the next step on this financial journey?
Well, the Babylonians believed in continuous learning. They understood that financial knowledge is power, and the world is constantly evolving. So you need to adapt your strategies and continue to learn to stay ahead.
So it's not a set it and forget it approach. You need to be actively engaged with your finances.
Precisely. Treat financial literacy like any skill. Keep honing it. And luckily, there are tons of resources available today. There are personal finance books, websites, even podcasts like this one. The key is to be a lifelong learner when it comes to your money. Lifelong learning.
Yeah.
I love that. And, as I was reading through The Richest Man in Babylon, I noticed there are some really impactful quotes that really hammer home these principles. One that really stood out to me was this one. Gold cometh gladly and increasing quantity to any man who will put by not less than 1/10 of his earnings to create his fund for future needs and for his growing age. It really emphasizes the power of consistent saving, doesn't it?
It really does. That quote highlights the idea that even small amounts saved consistently can accumulate significant wealth over time. It's all about the power of compound interest.
Compound interest, that's the magic word, isn't it?
It is. It's like a snowball effect. The money you save earns interest, and then that interest earns interest, and it just keeps growing and growing.
So it's not about making huge sacrifices, but rather about developing that habit, putting money aside regularly and letting it grow.
Exactly. Consistency is key. Now, the book is set in ancient Babylon. So how do these principles translate to today's world? I mean, we might not be using camels and clay tablets anymore, but the financial challenges we face are often quite similar, aren't they?
They are. That's what's so amazing about The Richest Man in Babylon. It offers timeless wisdom that can be applied to our modern lives.
I mean, think about it. Debt,
Right.
economic uncertainty, the constant temptation to spend more than we earn. We're essentially grappling with the same issues the Babylonians faced, just in a different context.
Exactly. And that's why this book continues to resonate with readers today, because it addresses those fundamental challenges that are inherent to human nature and our relationship with money.
So what would a Babylonian financial advisor say to someone today who's struggling with, let's say, credit card debt or trying to save for a down payment on a house?
Well, they'd likely start by emphasizing the importance of budgeting and living below your means. Just like we talked about earlier, that's the foundation for everything else. They might even echo the book's wisdom and say something like, control thy expenditures and thy credit card balance shall diminish.
Okay, I love that. Control thy expenditures and thy credit card balance shall diminish. I can almost hear them saying it.
Right. And then they'd probably talk about the importance of investing wisely. Once you've got your spending under control, you're paying yourself first.
Right.
It's time to make that money grow. And they'd probably encourage you to seek out opportunities for long-term growth, just like they invested in land and businesses.
Okay, but here's where I think things get a little tricky. The book focuses a lot on individual responsibility, which is great, but it doesn't really address some of the larger economic issues that can impact our finances, does it? I mean, the Babylonians didn't have to deal with things like income inequality or a global pandemic.
That's a valid point. You're right. There are definitely bigger forces at play that can make things more complicated. And those aren't really addressed in the book. So while these principles are incredibly valuable, we also need to acknowledge that sometimes it's not just about personal choices.
Right. Sometimes the system itself can make it harder to get ahead.
Absolutely. And that's where the need for comprehensive financial planning comes in. The Babylonian principles are a great starting point, but in today's world, we also need to consider things like tax optimization, retirement planning, insurance.
Right. Things that weren't really on their radar back then. And we also have to consider the psychological side of money.
Oh, absolutely.
Behavioral economics tells us that our emotions and biases can often play a huge role in our financial decisions.
Very true. And that's something the Babylonians didn't have the benefit of understanding. So it's not just about knowing the principles, it's also about understanding our own tendencies and developing strategies to overcome those mental hurdles.
Okay, so we're adding another layer of complexity here. It's not just about the numbers, it's also about understanding ourselves and how we relate to money.
Exactly. For instance, the Babylonians stressed the importance of avoiding risky ventures to protect your wealth. But sometimes our own fear or greed can lead us to make impulsive decisions that aren't in our best interest. So we have to be mindful of those emotional traps.
So even though this book was written centuries ago, it sparks a lot of important conversations that are still relevant today.
It does, and that's why it continues to be so popular. It's not just a financial guide. It's a timeless story about human nature and our relationship with money.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to address something I know some listeners might be thinking. Some critics argue that the book's approach is a bit too simplistic for today's complex financial landscape. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's some truth to that. The world is a lot more complicated than it was in ancient Babylon. We have more financial products, more investment options, and frankly, more ways to get ourselves into trouble.
Right, so it's not a magic formula for instant wealth.
Definitely not. But here's the thing. The underlying principles of financial success haven't really changed. Saving diligently, living below your means, investing wisely, protecting your wealth. These are all timeless strategies that still hold true today.
Okay, so it's like the foundation of a house. You might build different styles of houses on top,
Right.
but that solid foundation is essential.
Exactly. The Babylonian principles provide that solid foundation. Then, it's up to each individual to build their own financial house on top of that, taking into account their own unique circumstances and goals.
Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, but let's take a pause here and continue this fascinating conversation about the timeless wisdom of the richest man in Babylon in the next part of this episode. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're continuing our exploration of the richest man in Babylon, unearthing financial wisdom that has stood the test of time.
It's remarkable how these principles, though rooted in ancient Babylon, resonate so strongly in our modern financial landscape.
Right. I mean, we've talked about saving, budgeting, and even investing, all based on this Babylonian model, but I'm curious about the concept of continuous learning. In today's world, what does that actually look like for someone trying to navigate the complexities of modern finance?
It's about going beyond the basics. The Babylonians focused on mastering their trades, constantly seeking knowledge to improve their skills, and in today's world, we have access to a wealth of information and resources that the Babylonians could only dream of.
So it's not just about reading The Richest Man in Babylon and calling it a day.
Not quite. While this book offers a fantastic foundation, continuous learning means staying informed about current financial trends, exploring different investment strategies, and even understanding things like tax laws and retirement planning.
That makes me think about something we touched on earlier, that criticism that The Richest Man in Babylon is a bit too simplistic for today's complex financial world.
Yes, some argue that the book's focus on individual responsibility doesn't fully account for the systemic factors that can influence our financial well-being.
It makes sense. After all, the Babylonians didn't have to worry about things like student loan debt or a volatile stock market driven by algorithms.
Right, and so while the book's principles are timeless, they do need to be adapted and applied within the context of our modern financial landscape, for instance. The book advocates for avoiding risky ventures today. That might mean understanding the intricacies of different investment options, like the difference between stocks and bonds or diversifying your portfolio.
Speaking of diversification, I find it interesting how the Babylonians invested. They didn't have index funds or 401k, so what did invest wisely look like for them?
They focused on tangible assets like land and businesses, things that produced income and had intrinsic value. For example, one parable tells the story of a man who invested in a brick-making venture. He saw the potential for growth because bricks were essential for construction, just like infrastructure and technology are vital today.
That's a great analogy.
Mm.
So instead of buying bricks, a modern investor might consider putting their money into companies involved in infrastructure development or technological innovation.
Precisely, the underlying principle is the same: identify assets with growth potential and invest for the long term.
Now, you mentioned earlier that continuous learning might also involve exploring different investment strategies. Can you give an example of something that might be relevant for our listener?
Certainly, let's say our listener is interested in growing their wealth over time, but is also a bit wary of market volatility. They could explore a strategy like dollar cost averaging, where they invest a fixed amount of money at regular intervals, regardless of market fluctuations.
So instead of trying to time the market, they're consistently investing, which could potentially average out the cost of their investments over time.
Exactly. It's a way to mitigate risk and potentially benefit from market dips, aligning with the Babylonian principle of consistent and disciplined investment.
That's a really interesting point, and it brings us back to the idea that while the richest man in Babylon offers valuable foundational principles, it's up to us to apply them creatively and adapt them to our modern context.
Exactly, and that's where continuous learning becomes so crucial. It's about staying curious, seeking out new knowledge, and continually refining our financial strategies.
So the richest man in Babylon is like a roadmap, but we need to be skilled navigators to reach our destination.
I like that analogy. It emphasizes the importance of taking ownership of our financial journeys.
Now, I know we've talked a lot about the practical side of things, but I want to circle back to the psychological aspect of money that we mentioned earlier. The Babylonians didn't have behavioral economics, but they did have wisdom about human nature. What can we learn from them about managing our emotions and biases when it comes to money?
One key takeaway is the importance of patience and discipline. The book emphasizes the concept of delayed gratification saving and investing for future prosperity rather than succumbing to impulsive spending.
I'm reminded of the parable where a man is tempted to invest in a get-rich-quick scheme that promises easy riches, but he ultimately resists choosing a slower but surer path to wealth.
That's a great example. It illustrates the timeless wisdom of avoiding impulsivity and sticking to a plan in today's world of instant gratification. It's even more crucial to cultivate that Babylonian mindset of patience and long-term thinking.
So even though we have access to instant purchases and get-rich-quick schemes, the Babylonians would remind us that real wealth is built gradually through consistent effort and wise choices.
Precisely. And they'd likely advise us to be wary of emotional decision-making, especially when it comes to money. Fear and greed can cloud our judgment and lead us astray.
So instead of panicking and selling all of our investments when the market takes a dip, we should remember the Babylonian emphasis on patience and long-term growth.
Exactly. And on the flip side, when everyone's getting caught up in the excitement of a market boom, we should remember the Babylonian wisdom of avoiding risky ventures and staying true to our financial plan.
It all comes back to those core Babylonian principles, doesn't it? They understood that true wealth isn't about flashy displays. It's about having a solid financial foundation built on wisdom, discipline, and a long-term perspective.
It is fascinating how principles from ancient Babylon can be so relevant to our modern world.
It really is, and that's what makes The Richest Man in Babylon such a compelling and enduring guide to financial wisdom. But for now, let's take another break, and we'll wrap up our deep dive into this ancient wisdom in the next part of this episode. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've journeyed through ancient Babylon, unearthing financial wisdom that has stood the test of time. It's been quite the exploration.
It has. From pay yourself first to invest wisely, these Babylonian principles, though simple, hold remarkable power.
What strikes me is that it's not just about the money itself, it's about the mindset, the habits, and the long-term perspective that the Babylonians emphasized.
Absolutely. It's about becoming the master of your money, not the other way around. And that mastery involves continuous learning, adapting those ancient principles to our modern financial landscape.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from our exploration of the richest man in Babylon?
That's a great question. I think the most important takeaway is that building wealth is a journey, not a destination. It's about developing those habits, that mindset that allows you to continuously grow and adapt. It's not about finding some secret formula or getting rich quick, but rather about making consistent, wise choices over time.
It's about taking that first step, even if it's something as simple as setting up that automatic savings transfer or tracking your spending for a week.
Exactly. And remember, the journey to financial freedom isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. There will be bumps in the road, unexpected expenses, market fluctuations.
But just like the camel trader in the book who overcame adversity through persistence and smart decision-making, we can weather those storms and come out stronger on the other side.
And we can learn from our experiences, adapt our strategies, and keep moving forward on our path to financial well-being.
So as we conclude our deep dive into the world of Babylonian finance, I want to leave our listener with a thought-provoking question, knowing that the principles of wealth building have remained consistent for centuries. What small change can you implement today to start your journey to financial freedom?
Perhaps it's setting aside that 10% for yourself, exploring a new budgeting app, or committing to learning more about investing. Every journey begins with a single step.
And remember, even though these parables were written centuries ago, the lessons they contain are timeless. They're a testament to the enduring power of simple, consistent actions.
Thank you for joining us on this depth dive into the richest man in Babylon. We hope you found it insightful and empowering.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of knowledge and ideas.